You can put yourselves on mute. All right, welcome everyone. This is Kristen Vincent, Chair of the Westborough School Committee. Today is Wednesday, November 18th, 2020. I call the meeting of the Westborough School Committee to order. Thank you for joining us this evening at this remote live stream school committee meeting. Due to the impacts of the COVID-19 virus, some aspects of the open meeting law have been suspended. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Westborough School Committee is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceeding as provided for in the order. Town officials and Westborough TV have worked together to hold this meeting via televideo conference and broadcast it as such on Westborough TV's government channels, Verizon 28 and Charter 192, and streamed online at the Westborough TV YouTube channel for persons who would like to listen to or view this meeting while in progress. Any votes we take this evening will be roll call votes due to the remote participation. If you would like to speak at a school committee meeting during the citizens request portion of the meeting, please email your requests to school-committee@westboroughk12.org or email the chair directly at vincentk@westboroughk12.org. And thank you to Westborough TV for covering the broadcast tonight. And as a reminder, a recording of this meeting can be accessed from the Westborough TV website or YouTube channel at any time. I think we're getting some background noise. So Steve, I'm not sure if you need to mute something.
I was muted.
Okay.
You, Kristen.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I saw that. Thank you. So on our meeting tonight, we have with us Superintendent Amber Bach, Assistant Superintendent Dr. Daniel Mayer, Director of Finance and Administration Irene Oliver, Steve Durrett, Vice Chair of the Westborough School Committee, School Committee members Sarah Dulé, Lisa Edinburgh, and Raghu Nandan, our Student Representative Kyla Kamugu, our Recording Secretary Jen Benton, and we have staff from Westborough TV handling the live stream and recording of this meeting. Our agenda for this meeting is as follows. We will begin with an approval of minutes from November 4th, 2020 regular session and amended minutes from February 26th, 2020 regular session. We'll have superintendent's reports and reports from the Assistant Superintendent and Director of Finance and Administration. We'll have school committee member reports, building project updates. We have citizens' requests on our agenda, but we don't have any tonight. We'll have a COVID-19 impact update. That includes a data dashboard review, feedback from our district survey, and an update from the Fine Arts Department on band in the middle school and high school. And then we will continue our FY22 budget work with an updated presentation from the superintendent. And we do have a need for an executive session tonight. So we will begin with an approval of minutes. And first we'll start with the minutes from November 4th, 2020 regular session.
I can make a motion to approve the November 4th regular session minutes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you,
That's
Steve.
Steve.
Yep, thank you. Any discussion about those minutes? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Sarah?
Julie, yes.
Raghu?
Yes.
Lisa?
Edinburgh, yes.
Steve?
Durrett, yes.
And Vincent, yes, 5-0. Those are approved. And now we have amended minutes from February 26, 2020 regular session. I just want to give a big thank you to Andrea Macknick, the assistant to the superintendent. She was helping me prepare for a policy subcommittee meeting and noticed that in February, when we reviewed a large group of policies, that policy IGB, Support Services Programs, was approved at our meeting, but inadvertently overlooked in the minutes. So these minutes are back before you to reflect that amendment. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll
that?
move the minutes.
Thank you, Steve. Is there a second?
This is Sarah. I can second that.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Sarah,
Dulé, yes.
Raghu,
London, yes.
Lisa,
Edinburgh, yes.
Steve.
Durant, yes.
Thank you. And Vincent, yes, 5-0. So those are approved. And I thought it was fascinating reading those minutes from February and thinking about what we were up to and where our focus was and what we were doing in February versus our meetings now. So just a little snapshot into the not so distant past, but seems like a long time.
How everything changes, huh?
I know. So now I'll turn it over to Amber for a report from our superintendent.
Thank you very much. We have a lot of important stuff to cover tonight, so my update is relatively short. I want to give a shout out to the completion of fall sports successfully at the high school and the work by the coaches, you as a school committee, Board of Health, and Johanna DiCarlo, our athletic director, who really stepped up to make sure that students could have an experience. And I want to commend us for that commitment. I think when I met with her today, she indicated that there are a few districts across the Midwatch that have attempted to achieve sports for our students at the same level as we have. And I want to celebrate the fact that in our goal to provide the best and most typical experience that we can in these circumstances, we remain committed to hosting sports in the modifications they will allow. So thank you so much. I was able to see some games, and I think students benefited and enjoyed from the season they were allowed to have. So thank you. I also want to really acknowledge that Daniel and I were talking about today, we really have had a steady 2 weeks, kind of a typical range of daily work in the district and a feeling of the new normal of the experience of life in schools, both their remote life and their home life. And as we head into Thanksgiving, I think there's a lot to celebrate about the stability of our model implementation. And I want to again acknowledge the work of everybody to create that sense of physical well-being such that, you know, hopefully our emotional well-being continues to be sustained as well. One other note, I'm picking up on a lot of the committee work that's, you know, that had been on hold for me, some of the larger town committees that I function on as superintendent. You know, so Westborough Connects board meetings, the CAP committee work that they're developing, the master plan, those committees are all up and running after some hiatus to let everybody kind of cope with establishing protocols. And I've been attending the Capital Committee as they've been implementing a new model this year that you voted and approved in support of the selectmen's goals to maybe update that process. And I think it's developing nicely. Steve serves on that committee. We have been meeting Mondays basically, and we will present, schools will present, it looks like on the 30th. So I think that process is shaping up nicely, and I'll keep you up to date. And that's my report for tonight.
Thank you. Daniel, do you have anything to share now? I know you're going to be sharing later.
Yeah, just briefly, I want the school committee, I think it's worth you knowing that the Department of Education at the state level is continuing to ask as if business is normal for things that we're feeling pressed to be able to deliver. But I think they're the intermediary between the federal government and so we, you know, I feel like they are caught between a rock and a hard place, but we're being asked to do a audit of our Title I, Title II, and Title IV grants this year. And so I was on a conference call where they were explaining the 24 different directories, each which need to have multiple documents submitted to them to show that we're complying with the state regulation or the federal regulations around these grants. So, you know, under the best of circumstances, those are burdensome. So I just wanted you to know that they still are asking for that. The other piece of news we got this week is that the access testing for our students needs to still take place. These are for our EL, English language learner students. The access test is a formidable kind of project because the kids need to speak and listen and have headphones on, and so being able to and we have upwards of about 350 students, being able to test them in person, socially distanced. It takes a month of our school time under the best of circumstances to do that. I mean, under normal circumstances. So we're, as a leadership team, we'll be talking about it tomorrow, but generally the month of January is dedicated to that. They are extending the deadline out to from beginning of January to mid-March. I do think that we will have issues when it comes to compliance and bringing our remote students in to test in person. And so we need to just discuss as a district how we're going to logistically be able to pull this off and what the consequences would be of if we did not test all our students. Anyhow, so I just, those are both moving targets. And at this point, we're listening to what the state has to say. They're saying they asked the federal government. They didn't say anything about on the grant side, but on the testing side, they did say that they had asked the federal government for a waiver from having to test the EL students and also administer the MCAS. But I don't think Massachusetts is on the lobby list with the current administration, so they did not give Massachusetts a waiver. We are basically under, whether or not that change under a Biden administration and we're giving a waiver on the MCAS is still to be determined. But given that the access test starts in January, I don't think we'll get a waiver on that. So that's my update.
Thank you so much. Behind the scenes work happening, and yeah, that's a lot. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Irene, do you have anything to share now?
So I'll participate in the budget presentation. That will be my update for tonight.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. So we'll move to our school committee member report. So we'll start with Kyla. Do you have anything to share from the schools?
Yes, I actually do have something to share from all the different schools.
Great.
So first, I'd like to thank all the principals for actually answering all my emails. I send them every week. And from the high school, we got emails for the open house with parents that was supposed to happen. So all the teachers send emails for open hours. They were just explaining what kind of class they have and if they could do all that. Can you hear me? And fails, we have the month was the Chart of Education one, and they had geothermal drilling, and the second graders really enjoyed it. And that is my report.
Thank you, Kyla. Sarah, anything to share?
Yes, a couple things. Amber reminded me when she mentioned the sports. I want to thank Westborough TV and the other local access stations for providing the games, watching live streaming. And I know they shared, even if we played at Shrewsbury would share theirs and everyone could see it. And we got to watch soccer games and field hockey games, and I was nice and warm and eating dinner while I was watching those. So I hope we can keep that up, because that was definitely a plus of all this. So that was exciting for our family. Amber also went to the Board of Health last night. She didn't mention it, but I just wanted to mention it. It's I always appreciate their insights, their thoughtful process, their questions, their conversations. So that is on Westborough TV. If anyone wants to take a look, it's always a good watch. Board of Health. The Westborough Open House, like Kyla mentioned, was great. I was able to watch the live stream with Mr. Callahan, Mr. Lefebvre, and Mrs. Barrett. They did a great job answering hot topic questions. And then I was also able to watch 10 or more videos from individual teachers, and everyone, again, just put personal touches in there. It was great to see. I watched a chemistry experiment, which was very cool. So it was, thank everyone for their time and pulling that together. It was, again, a good way to make connections. And lastly, I will mention the turkey trot. We had over 600 people sign up for the turkey trot. So you will see them running next week by themselves or with families. We want everyone to send pictures if they can, post them on social media and Facebook because we don't have a photographer this year. So it'd be great to get pictures of people with their shirts on. And if you'd like to pick up your shirts, you can do that from 2 to 5 o'clock on Friday at the high school. We're going to do the drive-through by the cafeteria like we've done for many other events and things these days. So everyone kind of knows the drill. You stay in your car, we'll bring you the shirts out. So Friday from 2 to 5, and then on Saturday morning from 8 to 11 at Westborough High School. And that's all my updates.
Thank you. Raghu, anything to update?
Yeah, one thing. It was heartening to see some cones at the parent drop-off and pickup at Westborough High School, trying to bring some order into the chaos of parent drop-off and pickup. And kudos to the Westborough High School administration and staff trying to do something about this. I look forward to the continued effort into solving this very difficult problem. I've seen trying to pick up, it's really a mess, you know.
Yeah, we have more people driving their students more than ever. So it's traffic at all the schools is a challenge. But like you said, they're trying to find different ways to handle it. So yep, always asking for everyone's patience around that too. Lisa, anything to share?
I just wanted to thank our citizens for coming out for town meeting. There was a safe town special town meeting. 2 weekends ago, and very productive and done in a very safe way. Thanking the high school custodial staff who always goes above and beyond when it comes to these events, and it's really great. It was it was wonderful to see people come out and do their civic duty. It was wonderful. And I also wanted to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. We will not see you until after Thanksgiving. So enjoy, be safe, and take a little break. That's all.
Yeah. Steve, do you have anything to share now?
Nope, and I'll have very little to share in the next piece of the meeting.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to let you do that because everyone else has shared everything that was on my list. So well done, everyone. Lots of updates there. So Steve, I'll just have you share your brief building project update.
Okay, well, Fails is moving along very well. People have gotten into the groove as a result of pouring concrete on the base level as well as on the first floor, first or second floor, depending upon what you call it. The additional trades will be arriving at the site shortly. Some have arrived already, which means that our remote parking effort will come to pass shortly. And as a result, we'll be beginning to create the outside of the school building and internal rooms pretty soon. So things are rolling along pretty well as far as that's concerned, and I haven't heard much about any of the other projects that we've had outstanding at this point in time. And I know the facilities department is beginning to research for additional engineering services so that, in fact, we can get back on the groove as far as other improvements in the school buildings. So that's my report for today.
Thank you, Steve. So next on our agenda is citizens' requests, but we don't have any of those tonight. So we can move right into our COVID-19 impact updates. So there are several items under this. So I'll turn it over to Amber to get us started.
Great. So Daniel and I will be sharing pieces of this tonight. I'll start with and then hand it to him where he's going to do kind of a deeper dive into the first look at some of our data and feedback on the survey that we sent. So I just want to update that I did attend the Board of Health, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. To date, across district, we've had 18 cases total. Of those cases, there was only one within all of that where there was one case of a possible shared transmission, not completely affirmed, but assumed. And that was at Mill Pond early on in one of the cases that has now dissipated down and has resolved itself without any other additional cases. I think it's important that as a celebration of where we are before I talk about Board of Health, that the implementation of our protocols is very effective and that we haven't had school-based transmissions, which a lot of districts, except the one case at Mill Pond that we discussed as a possible in-school transmission. Again, our quarantine cycle worked and there were no other cases that came out of that. All of the other cases have happened outside of school, and we have picked up the detection of those through working with families or them calling us and saying they were keeping a child home. The process effectively is managing such that all of our at-home quarantining and all of our testing has returned negative, so that the rotation is effective. And that the Board of Health echoes that. I attended there last night. So I want to emphasize, we had a couple people that were asking for, a concern where they think there's a rise in COVID numbers. And so there's an assumption that that will impact our protocols at the school level. I want to be clear that the Board of Health and even at the state level, they're articulating that transmissions related to school age and to the school process, as well as that range of family, doesn't seem to be where the large numbers are coming from. And that in Westborough, that's particularly true. And that our performance in implementing the plan that we designed has been very, very sound, such that the Board of Health actually took a vote last night indicating that they did not feel that we needed to be utilizing the 2 weeks of remote following Thanksgiving and following the winter break. I assured them, and they also acknowledged that when we designed the structure and voted and approved it in a working contractual agreement with our teachers, that we didn't know what we know now. And they wanted to correct the record to indicate that given our protocols and implementation, they don't even feel that's necessary because we're managing the attendance and implementation of instruction well. I assured them that we're staying the course on that planning based upon the fact that that was a settled agreement and people have planned for that. But I think it's a celebration of note that the Board of Health demonstrates a high level of confidence in the implementation of the Westborough Public Schools and the families that are working with us such that what we've designed is working. I think it's also important to note that based upon the governor's, guidance and push to have schools in session fully, the Board of Health had some conversation points around that last night. And I know that we've received some parent inquiries as well. I anticipate that in January, there is a discussion where I will update you on what it would mean were we to try to, be in person, which we set aside early based upon the pressure testing of the size of rooms for us. But within that guideline, we are adjusting and making changes to the number of students that are there with us daily, following a range of protocols and then also needs based upon what we see in students' performance. So I think it'll be important to recognize that I'll return to you in January with a look at the financial and organizational implementation problems that could exist in coming back if we were to bring back Navy and Cardinal full time. I'll look at the opportunities for where we can be flexible with you, and then the challenges if we were to try to implement that fully. So I think that's a January process. I also want to indicate that the Labor Board indicated based on the MOU that we would have a return for a discussion on modifications and updates specifically related to Fridays at the time when we had that original modification of development of the MOU coming forward. So just important pieces for you to note that we're having a solid implementation, but we're at a phase where we're making adjustments based upon what we see is going on. And then there's also other people asking information around what those possible changes might be. So that's a January update for you, either first or probably the second meeting in January. And I would think that those are my key updates on COVID, information for tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Daniel, who, oh wait, I should do one more, Daniel, before I turn it over to you. The other key item that I wanted to highlight to you was the memo that I provided to you for fine arts. The state came out with guidelines approved for implementation of band instrumental work inside. And last night, the Board of Health approved the protocol, and we will be implementing that. I'm seeking your vote of approval, having heard that the Board of Health also approves of it, to implement the band instrumental practices utilizing a protocol where there are specialized masks with an insert where the mouthpiece can go through and has a flap that covers. We have mask covers for the bells at the end of the instruments, and then drop cloth pickup of any of the perspiration that flows out of the instruments. So that was approved, and I would be seeking your approval for that implementation. And I think that's the only other major update I had related to COVID.
Okay, did you want us to approve that?
Yes, I think because
we can do that before we move on.
yeah, if you could, I'd take that action. I think it will flow in the minutes better that Jen's recording it following my update.
Yeah, sounds good. So is there a motion on that memo?
Motion, oh, sorry. I can make a motion to approve the memo implementing the COVID band procedures.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, any other discussion?
I had a question. The drop cloth pickup would be done by the student themselves, right?
Yes, the students handle all of their own materials, instruments, pack up, and then disposing of everything that they need to at the end of the practice, and then custodians will clean the room. They'll empty the trash and take care of it.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I mean, people who are watching can't see the memo, but it's just to give them an idea. It's 10-foot distancing.
Right.
It's special masks specifically for only those instruments that would need to have a mouthpiece, whereas the other kids will be masked. Additionally, there'll be spit valve pads, and there will also be covers for the bells of each of the instruments that has a bell.
Yep.
And so it's a very thought out, more cautious approach than the state guidelines. That's certainly more secure, more safe, is what the memo talks about. So it's a pretty exciting advance from where we were in September, and exciting for the Fine Arts Department to be able to move forward on some ensembles and some.
Well, it's getting cold and they've been outside. So, if you if you follow them on Instagram, which is actually something you should do if you have an Instagram, they post pictures of their practices. And I think it's been exciting to watch, but I also think it's cold, and moving them inside feels really exciting. They'll utilize the band room when the spacing of 10 feet is viable for some groups, and then the auditorium, and they've mapped it out. Thank you, Lisa, for those highlights.
Any other questions? All right, I think we're ready to do a roll call vote. We'll start with Sarah.
Julie, yes.
Raghu?
London, yes.
Lisa?
Edinburgh, yes.
Steve?
Durrett, yes.
And Vincent, yes, 5-0. So I'm pleased that we can approve that and move forward with the implementation of band. This is for both middle school and high school. So that's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so then I think we'll move into Daniel's report.
Yep.
Survey feedback. Okay.
Thank you. So as parents are aware, and school committee members are aware, we sent out a survey of our parents and also of the staff and of our students in the last couple of weeks. And the surveys all had three different dimensions that they were looking at. I mean, it was sort of, there was an academic piece focused on our COVID structure, a social emotional piece based on, again, the unusual circumstances we're in now, asking about how the students are doing in terms of their emotional well-being. And then there were some questions having to do with race, and racism and trying to probe a sense of where are we as a community given the larger conversation in this country on those issues. There's a ton of data in these surveys that went out, between the parents and the students and the faculty. We have thousands of pieces of, thousands of respondents, and then, lots of data within there. And tonight's focus is on the first two pieces. So the academic and the social emotional. And so I'm at another meeting after we've had some time to digest and analyze the other pieces. We will come back to you and talk to you about the issues that were in the findings we have pertaining to race. So I'm going to share my screen, and I want to start with the parent findings here. There's parent, and then there's staff, and then there's the student is the order. And at the very bottom, I'm going to compare the parent to student responses on a particular dimension, having to do with perceptions about the amount of work kids are being required to do. You can see this, correct? Give me a thumbs up. Yes, thank you, Kristen. And the first thing under the parent finding dovetails nicely with what Amber was just talking about a minute ago, which is the perceptions of our parents vis-a-vis the health and safety protocols we have in place. And so I first want to say we have 2,310 students represented their parents. So if you were a parent and you had 3 students, you would submit 3 surveys having to do with each of your children. This represents 58% of our students. So another way of thinking about it is 58% of our parents have responded to the survey, which is a very healthy response rate. And under health and safety, so this question was only answered by the parents of students who come into school, which is close to 2/3 of our students. And you can see 97% of our parents agree or strongly agree that the level of COVID-related safety measures and protocols in each of their children's school is adequate to keep the students and staff healthy. And 96% says it's been easy for this child to follow the COVID-related safety measures. So as you can see, those are outstanding votes of confidence, and I think go a long way to explaining something that Amber didn't touch on yet, which is we're pleasantly surprised that the number of parents asking for a change between remote and hybrid is at 0.01% of the district currently. So it's minuscule, and it's spread across the grade levels, and it's spread across our schools. And so there's no pattern that exists in terms of dissatisfaction with one school or another. It's 40 folks that have put in for it, for 40 students rather, and some of those 40 are wanting to go to hybrid, and some of them are going to remote. So there's no particular pattern there. So then moving away from the COVID piece in terms of health and safety, is we asked a series of academic questions here. And you can see that the first question is, on the whole, the first question on the left, the bar on the left is, on the whole, I'm satisfied with how the Westborough Public Schools has responded to the COVID crisis. So this is in all dimensions. And 92% of our parents agree or strongly agree that we have, given the circumstances, responded well. And it feels, after all our hard work, and both from the school committee and the faculty, I mean, having that kind of 92% response of a support, it felt very good to see that, and we appreciate the support. When it comes to the question about, I'm satisfied with the way learning is structured at the student school, The number is still very high at 76% agree or strongly agree. And of course, we want to know the 25% that are in that category of those who don't agree. We have some open-ended questions we'll be analyzing in the coming weeks and looking at. I can tell you some of what I've seen is, it varies. And I would say the three major categories are: one, you should be open 5 days a week for all students. So there's one group. Another group is the workload is too hard, and you need to reduce the amount of work. And another group is the workload is too easy, and you need to increase the amount of work. So that's sort of what falls in those categories. I didn't see any systematic, sort of story. We asked parents about how easy it is to find their children's, how easy it is for the children to work independently and use the remote learning tools, the video calls and applications, etc. And 81% said they agreed and strongly agree that it's easy. I'm confident in my ability to support this child's education when they're working at home. 76% agreed and strongly agreed to that. And this child is able to focus on the work that is provided by the teachers, and 79% agreed with that. So these are sort of the academic focus questions. This is another kind of question that we're going to talk a little bit more when I get to the end of the report too, but this is across all grade levels. What do parents think about the amount of work given? And here I broke it out by all students just in the hybrid model and students in the remote model. And when comparing the hybrid to the remote, you could see there's some slight difference in that the hybrid parents, while 69% of them think it's the right amount of work, 24% would like to see, think it's a little too, way too little, and 7% think it's way too much. And in the remote, it's the 86% just about right, way too little is 9%, and 5% way too much. I'm going to show you how these numbers compare to the spring in a bit at the end, and so that will be interesting to take a look at. Now, in trying to get at, there's one academic question here, but most of these questions have to do with social emotional learning. But the parents were asked, how concerned are they? We wanted to get a sense of, from the scale was from not concerned at all to slightly concerned to I'm extremely concerned. So that was the responses. We figured that most parents would answer in the concerned to slightly to not concerned. That would be a normal response to be concerned under the circumstances. So we're focusing on extremely concerned, and those parents, their open response results was something that I have not had time to review yet, but we definitely are going to be reviewing these, and we could be reviewing them by school. So the principals will work with me to take a look at that. And the numbers are not anything in this category is obviously upsetting to the parents and to us in terms of if there's something we can do to help out. So the academic growth is the largest concern at 22%. The child's social emotional well-being is the second at 17%. I think we would have thought we were thinking like the social emotional might be higher, or the academic too, but also the child's relationship to the child's peer relationships. We were worried about the damage that the COVID could be doing for that, especially maybe for the kids that are fully remote that aren't coming into school. The numbers at 14% is not as high as we thought. The child's relationship with an adult at school, 8% are extremely concerned that their relationship isn't as strong as it could be. Child's behavior, 5%, and the child's physical health is 6%. Before I go on to the staff findings, are there any questions or comments that you would like to make having to do, maybe before I go to the staff, any on the parent piece?
What I have a quick question. Was there a breakdown of the well, the one you're on, was there a breakdown of remote only versus hybrid on those? Is there greater academic growth concern on one versus the other, or is the reason you put this in one chart was because there wasn't a discrepancy between the two models?
I didn't see a discrepancy, but I would, to be truthful, I can't say exactly what the differences were. I would look at them, but I was looking to see and thinking that there would be more of a social, emotional, or peer relationship discrepancy, especially for the kids who were remote, and I didn't see that there. But as to terms of what the differences are, like on the academic one, that's a good question. And I'm not sure off the top of my head whether that negative, like I can definitely look at that and get back to you.
And I had the same question about the previous chart, which is in terms of the amount of work, is that also, no, the one you had, the amount of work given.
Yep.
If you were to break that between age group versus, is there way too little a certain age group in hybrid, or because it seems as if the right amount is in remote right now, whereas you're looking at maybe way too little. Is that a grade level issue versus all throughout?
Parents at the secondary level in middle school and high school are more concerned about how much work their kids get. So when it comes to way too little, there seems to be, but the number's not that high, especially relative to the spring, which is what I want to point out to you later on, is that, but there is an element, especially when kids are getting to the college prep, to the high school level, of like, how much work, are you giving my kids enough work? And so the anxiety there gets to be a little bit higher. And I did not break it out, though, in the charts below by elementary or secondary, but I do know from looking at the data that the elementary age, the parents of elementary age children just are not as concerned about workload.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. For the staff, I want to point out here, we've got 242 respondents. This is close to 50%. The vast majority of these respondents are teachers. It's probably more like 70 to 75% for teachers in terms of response rate. And they were asked the question that, all things considered, our approach to educating Westborough students is working as well as can be expected, is the question. And what do they think of that? Our approach to educating Westborough students is working as well as can be expected. Strongly disagree is it's a couple of percentage points. Disagree is 12%. So in the negative category, it's less than 15%. Then there's this neutral category that I put in, which I kind of regret that there's a difference between the parent and the teacher survey in terms of the response choices. See, there's a difference in terms of a philosophy about whether you should give people a middle point or you make them choose to be on the positive or the negative end. So if you do and you could ask surveyors about this, but if you give people the middle point, some people are going to go to that middle point. But if you don't put neutral, then they would be forced to go to the positive or the negative. In any case, so they're sitting there in the neutral category. They didn't go negative, which is good. They didn't go positive, but you could say on the positive side, like clearly positive in terms of agree, you have 47.9 and 10.7. So you've got, 59% are positive, and then the 26% you gotta choose, right? They're sort of on the fence, but they're not negative. So there are reports that even some of our strongest students are struggling to be productive on their away days. at home. So when they're working at home and they're in the hybrid, and we ask them, have you noticed this? And we put this question there very purposefully because we were just hearing our faculty talking about it in sort of like pockets. So we just wanted to see, and we had some, basically observational data that people were saying, look, my child, when they're at home and they have that whole day, they're struggling to, with their organizational skills. It doesn't matter whether they're in high school or middle school or elementary school, that there's, that those days can be hard. And so the observation, it does turn out to be correct, that there's 67% of our teachers are saying, yes, they've noticed that some of our strongest students can be struggling to be productive. So we thought that was interesting and useful to learn. And we asked it so very particularly because the model we have is new, right? We haven't done this before. We'd be remiss if we weren't then asking questions about what can we do to help those students, and is this true, and what should we be putting in place? So, there's some suggestions down below. I'm going to skip over this. There's a lot of text here for a second. I'm going to say there's this pedagogical suggestion piece that we put before our teachers after we analyze the data in terms of what teachers are doing to help the students when they're at home be more productive. And there's a number of great suggestions that are there that I'm not going to get into the details of right now, but I just want you to know that's how we operate in terms of wanting to ask the question, wanting to get some feedback, wanting to make, from our academic, from our teachers and our staff, and then being able to have conversations about it, to how to tweak the model to make it more effective. I think that under the teaching and learning piece, and one of the things I wanted to emphasize here is that the hybrid teachers speak very enthusiastically about why students coming in and being in person is optimal, and some of the things that they've observed are their quotes here about how happy the students seem to be in school, to see their friends, to be with their teachers, that when they're in front of them, they can give them more one-on-one attention, both emotionally and academically, that they can read their body language and understand whether they're understanding what's being taught to them. They can help them, teach them how to use the technology. They can check in with them better and give them support and extra help. And the teachers, that's the most sort of positive pieces of this survey were them talking about what they love to do most, which is interact with the kids and have them in front of them. So that was all nice to read and see the level of enthusiasm there. They did, then talk about the issue of getting the response rate on work, and here's some suggestions that I was referring to that having to do with providing them with a structure and a checklist and ways to approach those away days that would make for more success. So I'm hoping that we get to a place, and I've heard some talk that the students, this survey was done 2 weeks ago, and teachers have already started to incorporate some of this. And so I'm hoping that they're going to start to see some positive effects. I do think it's imperative that we talk about the fact that our staff are feeling overwhelmed and very stressed. And that came out in the survey. I don't think anybody would be surprised by this finding if the vast majority of people have teachers that they know in their lives, whether they're relatives or friends, and you probably have heard them express how incredibly difficult it is to do this kind of work. And I know from personal experience of living with a high school biology teacher, my wife, she's been in near tears several times during the course of this year trying to run her biology remotely. But our teachers are very, they're game on in that they're working incredibly hard, but they're also saying the amount of work is just phenomenal. It's like this K-3 teacher is saying it's like 3 different jobs. I've got the kids in front of me, the kids who are away from me, and then the kids who are in front of me every other day. But then there's these kids who are there 4 days a week. And so there's moving parts that they've never had to deal with before. This teacher talks about the amount of time is feels like so overwhelming. They feel like they're not doing either job in person or remote all that well. And this person says, I'm a 21-year veteran. You keep on hearing teachers say, I feel like I'm a first-year teacher all over again, because they haven't developed the lessons and the units for this kind of instruction. And that's what's overwhelming when you're in your first year of teaching, is you're making everything whole cloth for the first time. This teacher here is echoing exactly what I just said. Is the most challenging part of managing my curriculum is that everything has had to be reworked. My class is incredibly hands-on, and every piece of it has been dramatically modified. Creating meaningful home day lessons for my students has been challenging. The goal is to create lessons that students can complete independently, and also gain meaning from them feels Herculean. The teachers were very appreciative and clear that the Friday time is essential for them. They keep on thanking the school committee for those half days. They say it's critical for them to help stay on top of their responsibilities and plan for the next week, and allow them to also have some semblance of a weekend to recoup. But anybody who knows teachers knows that they also work throughout the weekends too. But and there are some discussions about mental health and that people feel like they're burning out. And I was listening to NPR this morning, and they were interviewing some teachers who were saying the same kinds of things, that some of them are looking for other jobs at this point. There's some other data here about at different levels with some quotes that I'm not going to go into now, but they reiterate a lot of the same themes. So in general, we learned a lot from surveying the teachers. We're doing the best we can to support them in any way we can. We will continue to do that. Our curriculum coordinators have been awesome, and so have the administrators, in trying to make sure that we can find ways to ensure that our teachers feel supported. So now turning to our students, we've asked the middle school students and the high school students, actually, before I do that, just to be consistent, any questions on the staff or comments on the staff piece. You can always chime in at the end too, but did anybody want to say anything before I move on?
One question, Daniel, on the staff piece. For the first question, when teachers had negative comments, as well as it could be, was there any comments asked for that from their feedback on that?
You mean this all things considered approach?
Yeah.
All things considered, our approach to educating Westborough students. There were open-ended questions about what's working well and what would you change, and so driving at it that way. We didn't ask them the question of structurally, because that's just not on the table at this point, to completely redo the structure of the design. But I mean, I do think that I gave you a flavor of what's working well. Is they would say, on the one hand, when I have the kids in front of me, that's awesome. The remote teachers will say, who are teaching fully remote, which I didn't speak to here, do enjoy teaching the kids remote, in that they have some consistency Monday through Friday with the kids, but they also feel like it's harder to get, to have connection with them. There's positives, and then on the negative, there's just, it's the stress and the time and the overwhelming nature. But nobody was saying, if you did it 2 days kids coming in Monday and Tuesday, the same cohort, and Thursday and Friday, the same cohort, that would have been better. Like I wasn't asking the question that way. Because we had those debates over the summer, and you know, sort of the whole model wasn't. It was sort of like, given the model that we have, was sort of the focus of how we ask the questions. What can we do? You know, what's succeeding, and where can we help you to have it be more, you know, more palatable and effective.
Okay.
Make sense?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep. So on the student end, we will ask Mill Pond students some questions, but you know, they're a little young in you know, the early elementary, obviously, to be asking some of the questions that we're asking. But by 5th, 6th grade, we think we can get some data, but we're reworking the survey so it's not as long, and want to make sure that we've got the right kind of questions for them. So for the time being, I'm presenting you data for Gibbons and the high school. And at the high school, we have 619 students who replied. That's about half, 50%. And then at Gibbons, we have 542, which because we did it through the homerooms and the homeroom teachers, that's much more I would say it's more like 85%. I didn't calculate it exactly, but and the very first question here is the same that the parents had, which was about the health and safety and how easy has it been for me as a student to follow the COVID-related safety rules. And you can see that 94% of middle school and 93% of the high schools agree or strongly agree that it's been easy for them to follow them. And as to whether the teachers consistently enforce the COVID-related safety rules, 92% of Gibbon students and 91% of high school students say that the teachers consistently enforce them. So those are very encouraging numbers, and again, help explain why we've been so successful at containing the virus and not having spread within our schools. So there's a question here about academics. These academic questions are somewhat similar to, but not exactly the same as the parent ones. The first question is, I like the way that I'm learning and doing school right now. So our Gibbon students, 80% were agreeing or strongly agreeing, and 62% of the high schoolers. So there's definitely a difference there in terms of the perception for the high school students. I'm going to show you some patterns as far as our high school students are concerned, and we can talk about them all at once, where there's a little differential between Gibbons and the high school. So it's easy to use technology, very high, you know, I can find my assignments and everything I need, you know, very high again. I'm getting all the help I need to do well in school right now, 88% at Gibbons and 76% at high school. At home, my internet connection works well. Those numbers, well enough for me to do my schoolwork in Zoom or Meet, use Google Meet. Those are very high numbers. We know about the students that don't have internet connection or having troubles with it, and we're actively, as you know, trying to help those families. I can find my assignments and everything I need to complete my work at home. 92% agree or strongly agree at Gibbons and 85% at the high school. So then going down here to the amount of work, the similar question that was asked of the parents, just about right, 76% at Gibbons, high school 60%, and then, you know, it's almost way too little. The students, I know it surprises you that they would think that there's way too little work, but there actually are 2%. 2% of our kids want more work, both at the high school and Gibbons. So at way too much, 22% at Gibbons and 38% at the high school. Again, that's kind of the differential that I was referring to. that we saw up here. I'm going to talk about it all together at once in a minute. Student motivation questions. I can manage all of my schoolwork. 80% of Gibbons students, 66% of the high school students agree or strongly agree on that. So again, a differential, non-trivial in terms of percent. I'm putting my best effort into all my work, 96% at Gibbons, which is awesome, and 89%, which is also, I think, a very high number. So they're putting their best effort. I can complete all of my schoolwork on my own, 87% and 84%. I find it interesting that they can complete all their schoolwork on my own, but they say I can manage, so that 84% say they can complete it on their own, but then over here, 66% say I can't manage all of my schoolwork. So I try to reconcile those two. Then I'm going to go down here and again, I'll come back to that. Student connections, we're measuring like the connection to school and their peers. I spend enough time with my teachers in school or on Google Meet and Zoom. It's 91% versus 83% between Gibbons and the high school. I spend enough time speaking with my friends or family. Friends, sorry, I don't know why I said family, with my friends from school. 63%, you could see why these are lower, right? You basically, it makes sense. We're in the pandemic. You're not spending enough time with your friends. These starting in middle school, especially between middle school and high school, these kids are highly motivated to be with their friends. And the high school students, again, are more frustrated and feel more isolated than the Gibbons students on this dimension. There are adults at my school I can talk to if I need help. These numbers are very high and encouraging, given that the design of the model that they're under right now, that 92% would strongly agree at Gibbons and 87% at the high school. We haven't necessarily asked this question in the same way in the past, but this one I feel connected to at least one caring adult at my school is a common kind of question. And to be at 77 and 76% is, by historic standards, it never gets higher than that. So that is an extremely encouraging number. I mean, you always would like it to be at 100%, but when we've done the youth risk behavior survey in the past, there's always a cohort of somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% who do not feel connected to a caring adult necessarily at the school. And so, I just consider that to be a positive sign that they feel that the kids feel known. A teacher or student would miss me if I did not come to my remote or in-school classes. Again, it's in the 70, 74, and 74. So let me move down to these questions here, which I broke out by Gibbons first. And this is, we took the youth risk behavior survey, which is a survey that the students take every 2 years. We took the same exact question about how stressful in the last 30 days has your life been? And the kids we're most concerned about are those who say it's been very stressful as opposed to stressful. We would expect kids to feel stressed at school and while they're in school. Very stressful. We don't necessarily want our kids to be feeling too much stress. But part of what school is about is learning how to manage different obligations that you have, right? And so if there's not stress, then you're not learning how to manage a variety of obligations that you have. But the very stressful one, what's interesting here is that in 2002, right now, when we did this survey and used the same question that we used over prior years, that the level of stress is actually down for our students compared to 2018 for the, between for the girls, and slightly up for the boys. So the 2018 is 27%, it's down to 22%. And by historic standards, 22% is still, it's slightly higher than the 16, 14, and 12, but we have been watching our stress levels tick up. And I think, the administrative team is heartened to see that this stress level has not gone up significantly. That it's an indicator of mental health that our kids, while they're having to perform and being asked to perform work and fulfill their obligations of school, are not overly stressed by historic standards. The boys went from 12% to 15% here, so up a couple of percentage points. Now, the depressive symptoms, I've had a number of conversations with a lot of adults. We've all, the way this question is, we were all sort of saying, yeah, we've all felt somewhat depressed over, given the current circumstances in various ways, but we definitely are concerned to see upticks in these numbers, but not surprised. And the way the wording goes on this is it says in the last 12 months, has there been a time during a 2-week period where you have not been able to, you've been so feeling so lethargic that you haven't been able to do your usual activities? And, to some degree, Kristen and I, we were talking about this before the meeting started, of course, people can't do their usual activities. They just can't. So the question's a little odd in some ways, but nevertheless, it was asking explicitly, do you feel like, we're trying to get at depressive symptoms, and seeing the 18 to 32% bump in the females and the 10% to 22% bump for the males is not something we want to see. And it's something that we take very seriously. And we'll be talking a substantial amount with, we always do talk about these issues, but we'll be talking about them even more in the coming weeks with our staff, and encouraging our parents to be checking in with their students, with their children. So now looking at the high school life in terms of being stressful in the last 30 days, same pattern here in that we went from 45% in 2018 down to 39%. I want to draw your attention to the comparison between Gibbons and, Gibbons' stress level is at the 12%, 14, 16, 27 for the girls in the last 30 days. This is the difference between high school and middle school. Okay, 46%, 48%, 53%. High school is a stressful place. You're preparing for college. You're supposed to take harder classes. You're getting ready for the SATs. You're doing a lot more. There's a lot less hand holding. You're not on a team of teachers who are constantly checking in on you. It is a more stressful place. It's a more stressful time. We are Westborough, and there is, parents have high expectation for their kids. And so we've been managing stress and looking at this number for a while. We were pleased when we saw it went from 53% down to 45% for our girls. The girls in particular have always been high relative to the boys. And now it's down to 39%, which if you look at by historic standards is actually the lowest that it's been in several years. In fact, ever here since 2012. So the stress level is not as high as one would might imagine. And then the 24% for boys, it went up by a couple of percentage points. That's what happened also at Gibbons. But again, by historic standards, it's lower than the 28, it's lower than the 26. And then depressive symptoms, here we have going up from 25% to 35% and from 15 to 22%. That's of concern to us. And just like with the Gibbons, we will be looking around and having discussions with our counselors and our teachers and encouraging parents to be sure to be checking in on their children. So just to go back to the high school piece for a second, and both down below and up above, I want to make a point about the high school is stressful. So when you have kids saying, you know, that the amount of work given is way too much over here at 38%. I don't have historic data on that for several years at a time, but I can virtually guarantee you that that high number is probably not unusual at the high school level because they feel more stressed. That their motivation, that they can't manage their schoolwork and they feel stressed by it, that probably goes with the territory in high school to some degree. And they want to spend more time with their peers, with their friends. When you're in high school, you're doing a lot of homework and you wish you could actually have more free time, but you just don't have more free time. That's the nature of high school compared to middle school. I'm not trivializing it, but if I didn't see these stress numbers here over time be as like reasonable as they are by historic standards, I would be more concerned with the above data. So that's my perspective on it. I also want to point out this is kind of interesting perspective here of comparing. In the spring, we asked students and parents the same question about the amount of work. And there's a couple of things I want to point out here. So I want to show you, this is Gibbons, and this is the parent data in the spring of 2020. And this is the parent data in the fall of 2020. And what you can see is that parents at Gibbons, only 62% thought it was just about right. And then 35% thought it was way too little. And we're not surprised, given that when we closed down, we sent the message loud and clear. We don't want to, you know, we need to take care of everyone, ourselves. Everybody was freaked out in the spring with just cause that we all of a sudden shut down and we had to, on the fly, reconstruct what we were doing. And we didn't have systems in place, and kids and parents weren't ready for full on schooling. We have made adjustments this fall to make it more intense and more sort of normal in terms of our academic expectations. And so getting to a place where we see 73% say it's just about right. And then we have this division here where instead of just being at 2%, saying way too much, we have now 11% saying it's way too much. But so the way too much and the way too little are kind of split, and you have more of a bell curve. So I think that's interesting and that's positive. And the parents here at the high school, the same phenomena. I mean, they were even more concerned with like 59% saying just about right, but 39% saying way too little. Now it's 70% just about right, 21% way too little, and 10% too much. You can see that the students in the spring, it's kind of fascinating that 76% thought it was just about right in the spring, and 76% think it's just about right now. Our numbers at 17% being way too much to 22%, I don't consider that outlandish. And so that feels pretty good. Just about right, 70% for high school students in the spring, down to 60%, and now they're at 38% for way too much versus 21% for way too much. One could argue that, you know, the way too much, that as a district, we don't want to be a pressure cooker district, but we are in some ways. So I don't look at that with alarm, especially given what the parents are reporting, and especially given how the students are reporting to us about their stress levels. If I thought that this was the cause of the depression and the stress was off the roof, I would like look at that number and I would like be more concerned about it. But that's my current take on looking at the data. All of this has come in the last couple of weeks. I'm open to hearing what you guys have to say about it and your interpretations. I still need to hear my administrator's interpretations. There's, this is not a science looking at this kind of data. It's not causal data. It's just, being able to look at some tea leaves here in terms of how the students are doing when it comes to those issues of, stress and work demands. But just to summarize, I think overall, our parents and our faculty, all things considered, feel like we're doing a very good job. We're in a good place. We're protecting the health and safety of our kids extraordinarily well, and that there are some tweaks we can make here and there, and we will be doing that in the near future. So that's my summary, and I want to just now open it up and take questions.
Thank you, Daniel. I know a lot of work went into preparing this and going through those comments, and sounds like you still have a lot more comments to dig through there.
Yep.
And thank you to all of the parents and the students who took time to fill out the survey. Obviously, as you can see, it was very helpful for us to have this feedback and this information. Who has questions? Go ahead and unmute yourself and share your comments or questions. Lisa, why don't you go ahead?
So I guess the one thing I wonder more about is the stress level or the depressive symptoms being more connected to the style of learning. I guess the feedback I'm getting is that in-person days are more mentally and physically exhausting. And therefore, I would think that the amount of work, and I've also heard from administrators and some parents that they think that more is being done in person, meaning that you're able to learn faster with the smaller groups in person than the at-home days. Therefore, it's a more intense 2 days a week where they're in person learning more. So I guess the depressive symptoms or the stress is just simply different this year. And so it's really hard to compare the years versus now, because we really don't know what kids are really going through at home or and with less in-person help when they need help with school, because there's certainly that third that sound at the high school as if they're not feeling like they're getting enough help for the at-home days. And so I do wonder whether it's a fair comparison to make between other years, just because the style of learning and what's happening in their lives is just completely different. It is surprising that the stress percentages are lower. It's interesting. It makes me wonder about what's going through their minds when they answer those. But, and the other most concerning is the 24%. Not feeling like they had, even though you looked at it like it's never going to get higher than that 76%, I think was the number. I'm concerned about the 24%. I'm concerned that, they do not feel like they have that emotional support. So I do wonder, are there anything in place or happening with guidance departments in middle school and high school? There's no crew program happening at Gibbons right now in terms of just finding different support programs that we had in place before. And the other difference is if you're only going in twice a week, then your support from teachers is only twice a week. And that can change whether kids are relying on teachers for that emotional support that they used to have that they don't have now. So I guess those are my comments about it's complicated.
It is complicated. I'll just make one note that I also think that as we look at talking with students, and I think we all on the ground have worked to do that and think about it, we can't make an assumption that the thing that's depressing them is academics. So again, like the things that's depressing a lot of our kids is that their senior year is messed up, that they're stressing about college, that they haven't seen their friends, that we missed prom, we missed, there's a lot that makes the quality of life enjoyable, that offsets stress and brings joy and counteracts a lot of aspects of depressive feelings. And I think that we can't make the assumption it's just the academics. I think it's too complex for that. I think it's too individual by student. So I think your questions are spot on, and we need to go into the comments and we need to break the data down differently, which is what Daniel said, like we'll start doing with admin and counselors and work. And we are doing crew. It's modified and it's done differently, but they are doing crew. I just want to make sure we don't leave here with confusion. They're very committed to the fact that the SEL implementation work that we're doing is coming through crew and it is being done. And that on the ground level, we are spending time, on that level of work. So anyway, just my additional comment.
No, I appreciate that. And thank you for noting the crew. Hadn't seen it in news and notes, so was unaware. So that's excellent. And you're absolutely right. You don't know whether this is about academics at all. And it absolutely is a good point that there's so much going on that can be affecting our kids today. So thank you.
I would add one thing too, that our counselors are very active at working with, as are our teachers. Our teachers communicate to our counselors the kids that are disengaged from school, and who's not handing in homework, who's not showing up on the Zoom, who's not coming into school. Those people are front and center on our radar, and we know who those kids are. And just because they're not connected doesn't mean that we're not trying to connect them. It's just that there are adults and kids who just have trouble making connections. And so as much as you reach out and you connect with them and you try to get them to join a club or a sport or fit in, we have trouble. But don't misunderstand. Those are the kids we spend most of our time working on behalf of when it comes to our, with our counselors and sort of reaching out to make sure that they're, if it's the kid who sits alone in the lunchroom or is playing alone at recess, or those are the ones that we care about, in ways that I think it's hard for other people to realize how obvious it is to us that those kids need our help.
I'd love to hear from Kyla.
Oh, I was just about to jump in and speak. Yes, I do think that academics is one of the things that have influenced the decline in mental health, but I wouldn't assume that it's only academics, because we're all living through a pandemic, and it's not just the students, it's been hard on everyone, and as I've interacted with very many students, the workload is more. Like, it's more than when we used to be in person, because I think there's an assumption that since we're home, we have more free time, which is contrary to what's happening. So the workload has become excessively a lot. People are like not sleeping at all. The assignments need to turn in, and it's become really hard for people to keep up and have a moment to just breathe. So that has been a conversation I've had with multiple groups of students, from ninth grade to seniors to sophomores. The workload has been mentally draining for a lot of people. And while we do appreciate the efforts made by our counselors and teachers to reach out, each and every person is experiencing this quarantine differently. So it will reflect differently on how we react and how we interact with different situations and how we do our work. And the at-home thing and just going to school 2 days a week, that it just doesn't leave enough room for motivation to do your work. I've had that conversation too with a lot of people. People are just highly unmotivated, and it's not anyone's fault. It's a global pandemic, so we can't really do anything about it. And other than the mental health and the workload of students, I would like to talk about the race part of the survey. I don't really want to go into details. I just want to give a few comments about from just general experience and just just going to Westborough, because I feel like racism in the survey has given a platform for it to be talked about, because most people were discussing it when they were like filling it in, so that is a good thing. But I would just like to say that it is unlikely that incidents would be reported because Westborough is a primarily white institution. So it is very unlikely that incidents like of microaggressions would be reported because there are very few Black students. And it is more because school committee makes the policies, which is an amazing thing, but it's more about implementing those policies. It's more about people knowing that there are policies and knowing that there are consequences, and having a refresher of those rules and regulations that would be interpreted by the policies we make. So it's more about the action than just having policies, because policies are good, but we do need people to understand that there are consequences for microaggressions, there are consequences for racism, there are consequences for this and that. And when it comes to teacher-student relationships, teacher-student microaggressions, there are workshops that our teachers attend, which is a very nice thing. It's a very nice resource. But the question is, who is teaching these resources? Who is giving them their information on how to be racially sensitive, how to be culturally sensitive? Because if the person speaking is not a person who has a diverse and specific point of view, it won't really come across as a message from a because if I say something to someone, it would make more sense if I understood the point of view that I was talking about. So it is a very important consideration to think about who we're employing to talk to our teachers, and if our students know that there are consequences, if our students know that the Westborough High School system is a safe space to talk about the incidents and how, and the protocol that would go in case of an incident that is reported, because most people just assume that it would be taken lightly. So there needs to be a standard protocol on how it's going to be handled, because it's not a light thing, you know? So yeah, that's all I have.
Thank you, Kyla. Appreciate your perspectives. And as Daniel said, we have a lot of data from that portion of the survey that we'll be digging into and reporting out to everybody. So we'll definitely want to include you in on those conversations. So, and I'm glad to hear that because we included it in the survey that it became part of the conversation. So that's good. Any other questions?
I just want to affirm that, to Kyla's points, that we will be spending in-depth conversation on that and looking at it both at the school level and the district level. And so I think along the lines of those insights and looking at the course that we teach, which does have diverse candidates teaching it, but I think, again, part of that larger discussion, and we look forward to it. And I think it's why we're excited that we could get a first pass on a snapshot of data and then refine our questions and see where we can learn. So it's good work ahead, and a piece that we know that even in a time of immense stress for our faculty, they articulated this was a goal they wanted to maintain. And I think it speaks to the fact that we're committed to recognizing areas for learning, and I look forward to bringing it forward to you as the year goes along.
I would just say that the data in the survey that concerned me was the teachers reporting how stressed they are and how, some of them are headed for burnout, and I get it. And I knew that was coming when we started the school year, but just seeing their comments and the specific examples of how it's affecting them. So I would like to ask Amber and Daniel to think about how our community could better support our teachers. Is there something that our parent community could do? It could just be like a small act of something, or is there a way that we could provide some support? And the answer might be no, like there really isn't anything, but you can think about it and let us know, because I know there are a lot of parents who love their kids' teachers and want to support our schools and don't know how because we can't invite them in to volunteer anymore and we can't have them, coming in. So if you could think of some suggestions and we can pass them on to parents, I know we would be able to support our teachers somehow.
Cards to start with.
Just a quick email, right?
Just,
quick note, thanks. It's Thanksgiving.
I think, in our profession, we hear more from people when they've got concerns than when they're happy. And judging by the survey, people are, feeling like our teachers are doing an incredible job, and just express it. That would be great.
Yeah, it's a
That'd
great
go
place
a
to
long
start.
way.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think we'll end this portion of our meeting because I know we have a whole other big presentation to wrap our heads around. So this was a lot to consider and digest, and we'll keep looking into this survey data and see how it's going to impact us moving forward. And so I will turn the agenda over to Amber because we're going to look at an updated presentation about the budget.
Thank you very much. We had two large topics to bring to you tonight. The first being the data. I appreciate your attention and energy for it. And then now turning towards our continued work on the budget. So you've received initially from Daniel several weeks ago the enrollment data. At that time, we indicated that we would be coming forward with no new positions in this budget. And then followed by that, the presentation that I did 2 weeks ago that looked at the framing of impact areas on the budget with a lot of specific looking at what we had cut because of COVID, but also because of the bus contract. We'll review some of that again tonight. And then also a look at the kindergarten implementation of tuition-free kindergarten and that impact. So I think at this time, we'll dive in. I'm going to keep my presentation succinct, and then I hope we can go back and focus on questions and discussions based upon, how you're experiencing it. So if we go to the next slide, the next piece, and Daniel, I don't know how people are seeing that. How is that looking to you guys screen-wise? Can you see it all? On my screen, it's kind of cut off, but that's because of my screen, I think is different. Is it good for people? Okay, good, sorry. So we really remain focused on the goals of tonight being a review of the timeline, talking briefly about goals. Again, people tune in at different times to this discussion. I think it's important that we at least reiterate those, that they see the review of the budget process and the major look at cost centers. I'm going to talk about that tonight, and then preview the anticipated budget increase and next steps moving towards my final recommendations on December 2nd. So if you go to the next slide, that speaks to the timeline. And based upon the timeline, we're looking at tonight, 11/18, a preliminary budget proposal, presentations where you see basically all the cost centers and the impact of how we're managing those, and the development of preliminary percentages. Again, I'm putting those in front of you earlier because I think there's a lot to digest around all the different layers of budgeting against COVID impacts. And I want us to have plenty of time to talk about it and to stay in a place where we get lots of opportunities to surface questions. If you go to the next slide, you focus on the fact that we always come at this with a goals-centered approach, looking at maintaining excellence of the district. We're managing this year facing all of the things with regard to the pandemic, which we've highlighted. But we have to have both a long and a short view of this work. And we want to look towards next year and know that we can maintain the excellence of this district. We also want to remind people that we're presenting a non-COVID budget. So the budget that I'm presenting is focusing on understanding a standard budget entering the FY22. So that'll best parallel what we did last year. We had a standard FY21 budget, you had approved it, and then we had to make modifications for COVID. I'm coming forward with this budget in the same framework. We're looking at an anticipation of a typical year for FY22, and then we will respond based upon the trajectory of what the world tells us is going to happen. At the same time, our major focus is to maintain excellence in that work at all times, to respect relationships with the faculty and their families and the community, to manage costs and impacts, and to be strategic in how we do that. So if you look at the summary, the first piece I want to reiterate you on the next slide is to look at what are the impacts on this budget that we highlighted at the last meeting, and I think you really want to understand and we'll spend the majority of looking at tonight. This is a level service budget. This is a no increase base on all of our major cost fund areas. No new positions. And you're looking at contracts as voted and the increases that come with those for salaries and contracted services. So some of the contracted services do have an increase. We've kept them as tight as possible. I'll be calling those out again tonight. You'll see hard numbers on those and you can understand them for that, what that impact is. Also, we talked in the last meeting a lot around technology. It remains essential to us to have a strong technological base, both during a COVID time where it's maxed in ways that are really staggering in terms of impact. But really, it's going to be essential to rebuild a baseline that lets us maintain strong technology in the district. And we've eroded some of that work over the last 2 years. And lastly, the strong commitment voted at town meeting and that we brought forward after a lot of research and work to move to tuition-free kindergarten. And the impact of that being at play in this budget is a piece that we'll review tonight. Next slide. So you see in this the indications by cost center of a level service budget. You see for the schools, they are all at zero increase, as is district-wide. There's a small readjustment that Irene made around the $400 because of a differential that had been off in last year. You see special education as an increase against the gap in circuit breaker. We're going to talk about that number because it's actually a lot lower than when I brought it forward to you in the last meeting, which shows you kind of the ongoing work that it takes to get to a final percentage. You see no increases in fine arts, curriculum, and staff development. You see the $50,000 commitment to hold the line in keeping our technology funding appropriate. You see no increases for school committee athletics, and you see a contract increase for transportation, and you see a reduction in facilities. So you're really looking at only contracts and contracted services as increases. Next slide. So I'm going to move you fairly quickly through the cost centers of our different schools and major areas for expenditures. I think that you can then study those, and if you have comments or questions, they would come forward to me between now and when we do final presentation for recommendations on the 2nd. And that's why we provide the detail of this number up closer to you so you can review it against last year's budget book. You can look at this and refine your questions. And if there's any against the cost centers, we're always happy to then provide that detail and see what people are seeing in that. You look at Armstrong's budget, you see it's a 0% increase. You see with fails the same. When you go to the next slide, you see with Hastings as well. I can't see here, Daniel, is that as you're clicking through those? When you move to Hastings, you see 0 as well. When you move to Mill Pond, you see again 0% increase. 0% increase at the preschool as well, back in Hastings. At Gibbons, the same. When you get to the high school, again, 0 increases. When you get to the district level, you see again 0 increases. Student services, you see basically 100,000 change in tuition contracts. And we'll look at that against the gap in the differential of funding that we got between last year and now. Fine arts, 0%, curriculum and development as well. Athletics, school committee. And when you get to transportation, you see the opportunity to see the 1.7% increase standard in the contract anticipated. And in transportation, I want to emphasize a couple pieces. That increase is taken against a number that we reduced by 500,000 against the $1 million that came in. I'm going to review that. There was a $1 million increase in our contract, which again was anticipated and transparently presented. And in looking at that number for Daniel, where are you going? I can't hear you, but you're way in a different place than I am.
I know. For some reason, my controls here are not working very well.
All right. I'm going to give you a minute to back up to transportation slide 20.
Okay. I'm going to go out of full presentation mode for a second.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. I just want what we're saying to make sense. When you look at the transportation slide, which he'll bring back for us, I think you see that we reduced the original transportation contract by about 500,000. So the number of this increase is against that reduction. So that's maintained from last year to this year. And you see then the 52,361 is the base increase of the contract. If you look at facilities, it's two main slides. Slide 1, you can go right to slide 2. I'll go slower, Daniel. Sorry, I was flying through those other ones. When you look at the second
to the next one.
Yep, facilities, slide 2, you see there's a $12,000 reduction against the overall expenditures, and you see 0 on all of those other areas. So when you look at all of the major cost centers, we've zeroed those out. And coming forward at maintenance, not a maintenance of service, but a level funded service for all those arenas. When we move to slide 23, Daniel, which is the circuit breaker, I'm going to turn it over to Irene, and we're going to walk through the circuit breaker slide and make sure that we can really spend time discussing the fact that the first pass number that we had for circuit breaker was up close to 500,000. And the work that we did in terms of reconciling where we are and a couple changes, I'll turn it over to Irene and let her highlight for you where it stands currently.
Yeah, so the original projection included a 4% tuition increase. Typically, you don't know where the out-of-district tuition organizations will increase their tuitions anywhere between 2%. Some have been up to 12%. So we typically put a little percent on there, and this year we did 4% to try to reduce some of the layers of the funding. We took the 4% off of our general fund budget, but kept the 4% increase on our circuit breaker. So there's still a little bit of a, it's not so much a buffer, but risk factor that has been reduced by keeping the 4% on our circuit breaker. So that's where we were able to bring down our general fund increase in the out-of-district tuitions. So it was at 3.001% originally, and now it's at 2.936. It's not huge, but it is a good percent down on our out-of-district. We are really trying to be cautious of making sure that we don't cut too much, but are trying to be fiscally responsible and how we reduce funding to the taxpayer. So the other part of this equation is that in not realizing the initial spreadsheet, which was very preliminary, and please understand this is speed budgeting. Normally districts get months and months of analyzing their budgets and preparing their budgets, and we go rock, science forward with our budgets. And so sometimes it takes a little time to sift through our initial funding. And so that being said, if you go all the way down to the bottom where it says FY21 general fund budget, the equation there, I didn't change the FY20 dollar amount budget to FY21. So it made it look as though the increase was skewed. So in changing that, it brought it down. And also when reducing the 4% on the general fund, it brought everything down to 101,042 increase over the FY21 budget from 493,345. So,
And you also had 2 students that you carried for the full year who age out midway. I think it was 2 or 3.
Exactly. It's
So
a process.
yeah.
Yes.
So we have some students that age out of programming, and so wanting to come in as conservative, a budget in terms of the growth in those tuitions, we took those students out, so they're not calculated at all for the year, and because you're carrying the 4% anticipated increase, so it's only on those known, not the students that will age out during the year. Again, very conservative. We also, well, I wouldn't say conservative, actually more aggressive to bring that number down. And I think we also are utilizing, for years, we maintained 100,000 out in my first 4 years here. And to be able to respond to tuition issues, this last year and this year, we've utilized the full 100,000. So you're all in on a full circuit breaker calculation and the 100,000, and pulling the percent of overall anticipated potential growth out of some of the calculations. So I think that number's, in a place where it's as tight as it can be, and continues to speak well to the work of the SPED department to provide really robust programming, special education needs to a wide range of amazing students at as cost effective as possible to the taxpayer.
Yes, and the SPED department has done a tremendous job in doing the circuit breaker claims. They've been very good. There have been times where there's only been $400,000 coming back to the district, and now you're looking at what, 1.2%? I mean, 1.2 million. So there's been a lot of work in this department, and it's been very beneficial to the district. And so I'm just saying that the 100,000 is not being, we're putting it back in, and we're also reducing the 4%, but I think it would be okay. I'm looking at the budget from the state level, and they're putting back in more circuit breaker money. So I'm hoping it sustains itself through the House and Senate, and that will be back up on percentage-wise on the reimbursement rate. Right now, we're at 70%, so I'm hoping that we can get back up to 73, 75%. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but that would be very beneficial to the district and to other districts as well. So
right, that's where you see some of the gap issue between how much we got when we were getting 75% versus them dropping it to 70. All right. We can come back to any of this for discussion, but we've been through it once, and so this is kind of a second pass. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to reiterate then what we know and understand about, embedded in this level service budget where we zeroed out any increases. You have impact numbers that come from some key areas. You have the 101,000 that we just discussed in the circuit breaker gap, articulated by Irene and I. You have $706,000 of salary impact in the 8 FTE moving into the budget from the difference between FY21 to FY22. So currently, we paid for those salaries with savings that kept us from needing to go for that warrant article from the bus and from subs and from a variety of other areas in FY20 that allowed us to, working with the town, sustain coming forward with this year covered with that money. But now you see anticipated, those case salaries are coming into the budget. So in effect, you have really 1.5% of our total increase coming from the addition of that transition. And then you have
Amber, have to speak to the fact that the town will be receiving perhaps not 100% offset, but an offset in regards to those new positions in the budget as a result of the discussion that allowed us to take on those teachers as a result of full-time kindergarten or pre-kindergarten staffing.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be I think it's going to be a central conversation for us moving through this budget process, Steve, because I think, and I'm going to talk when we come back to those kindergarten numbers, because I think what you see is that there is an impact where the anticipation of what they thought would be $800,000 coming to offset the K in the number that was predicted by the state. We're not seeing in the fruition of the Chapter 70 money that is called out in the cherry sheet as of yet. So I'd like to talk more about that after we kind of get down to that other slide. So I'll return to it.
Yeah, but I do think we shouldn't just leave it here. That in fact we do expect that money will go to the general fund, at least a portion of that 706,000. Based on the way the process works. So the town isn't seeing the whole 706,000 new money to be raised from the tax.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're going to have to retell when we looked at it, when we were presenting last year, we were clear that we knew that we would have to re-articulate that and speak to the fact that the town's Chapter 70 would be providing offset to that transition, either fully or partially. So yes.
Yeah. I just think we shouldn't pass up on the opportunity to make people aware that it isn't a full impact, that in fact we expect through the machinations of the way the state budget works that a goodly portion of that amount of money is going to be provided to the town, which goes to free cash for use for other purposes.
Right. And I think that we're going to see, I think if we anticipate what we're seeing in the numbers of the state budgeting and what we're seeing in the statistical statewide issue of people in districts seeing a depression in their enrollment numbers. So there's a lot of districts that are suffering in a time of most need with the Chapter 70 number going down because they have impact enrollment numbers because people didn't enroll their kid in kindergarten, kept kids or put them in private, went homeschooling, or didn't enroll their child. And they literally are concerned that there are kids that are unenrolled right now in some districts. So we see an impact across the state, which superintendents have been assessing to understand. There's been a lot of surveying to see an average of concern in the change in enrollment across districts. So what you see is we got additional money because we had that kindergarten offset becoming 1.0 as opposed to 0.5. But I think until our enrollment rebounds next year, where you see students who homeschooled or did something different for the year returning into our enrollment numbers, hopefully a second bump in our Chapter 70. But I think we're going to have to discuss that at the town level. We'll discuss it with FinCom, and it's going to be a big part of what we have to understand.
Yep.
So when we look at the impact of this, I want to just go to the next slide, which again gives you an initial clear summary of where this brings us. So you see the numbers that I've talked about. You see that 100,000 in gap of the circuit breaker with tuitions, not a cost we can't pay. That's being carried. You see the 52,000, which is the transportation contract increase. You see the salary increase, which is carrying the contract rollover as settled and voted, plus the 8 positions of that kindergarten lifting that number. You see contracted services, which is basically phones and trash, which have gone up, minimally at 34,000. You see technology that we've talked about carrying a portion of that back in to our commitment. You see a reduction in utilities, and you see the other things, level service. So it's a pretty hard number that comes from the basic rollover of contracts and the salary increase. So I want to step back and kind of analyze the concept of where it's looking right now as I move towards final recommendations in the next presentation. And so I want you to understand the context of that percentage. So I'm just going to take people back a little bit and look at what this percentage would look like in different contexts. So if you go to the next slide, if we had not faced the COVID cuts, if we had come forward with your originally voted budget for FY21 that you were carrying to town meeting, if you were working against that number and you were, I need to go to the next, oh, sorry, I need to go to the next slide. I'm running double windows here. And we still had the kindergarten folded in, we would have been at a 4.25% increase. So just the differential in what we cut increases that percentage. And again, yet we're carrying all the same work and all the same planning that had led to that original budget. And I think, again, you see this would include against that original budget number. And if we had to absorb the kindergarten without any help of Chapter 70 or any other changes, would have been a 4.25% increase. So I just want to look at the last piece of this. If you go to the next slide, you see that in a year, if we had been rolling forward the budget you anticipated and didn't have the kindergarten to deal with, we would have been coming in at about a 2.97. So, I think in understanding the operational costs that we're rolling forward that are typical to the annual budget process, we would have been presenting a budget that's fallen within a very similar percentage range that we've worked on year over year for several years. You've had 2 years where several years were higher at close to 5% for 2 years, and that had added staff. So if you think about the kindergarten bump, and there were years when we added a lot of positions, it was closer to that 4.35%. And if you look at this in the context of what you planned to do and where we would be right now without the kindergarten, you would have been looking at that about a 2 point, we're looking at a 3% budget. So I feel like in the context of the way we're budgeting and people understanding the numbers, it's important to see that we're coming forward with operations where we're trying to maintain costs and would have been in a good place against that original number and the K discussion. So I'm not trying to mitigate the 5. I just want us to understand it. And I think it's going to be important for us to be able to articulate the commitment of what it takes to maintain services facing the pieces that have to be embedded in this budget. So if you go to the next slide, I just want to, re-articulate a piece of that summary. That's slide 23, which is, this is where it stands in the calculations that we've run thus far. And now we're going to go back and review things again. But, I think it's important that I'm in a transparent place with you, that if you go to the next slide, you look at the fact that we initially, in a commitment that we felt very, very good about in the budget that you proposed in FY21, cut $563,000 out of that budget, took a one-time offset of community education to take the edge off of that transportation contract, anticipating that we would have had full revenues on our revolvings for, athletics and other things. And, instead we've faced a range of deficits and we've have expenses unanticipated. So, you cut that. And then if you go to the next slide, I think that we had a budget last year that we felt represented strong needs of the district, anticipating the kindergarten and coming forward thoughtfully, having made a lot of substantive cuts that I think had been approved and accepted by selectmen, by FinCom, by you guys. We were coming in a place that we felt was very good. And then we turned around and we cut another $706,000 out of that budget. So, as as I head towards a recommendation to you for the budget we need to maintain services, even at a level service budget, you can't absorb those kind of cuts and losses to your budgeting and then turn back around and then look for that again. We often talk about the fact that, you know, we leveraged that $200,000 offset of community ed because it was really a good faith plan to mitigate the impact of the transportation over 2 years. We wouldn't have done that if we'd known we were going to face what we faced. But again, all of this was done in good faith just to kind of, I feel very good about all the collaborations we've done and the budget we're running this year. But in looking towards FY22, I need you to see that percentage and begin thinking about it and pose good questions, because I don't see it changing a whole lot before I return to you with recommendations. So, you know, there's not a lot to be creative with here. We've used a lot of offsets of putting people on grants and other things over the years, but every time we do that, that diminishes the base that maintains that salary increase. And, you know, we can't operate that way. So this is where it stands as of now. And if you go to the next step slide, we meet with our liaisons tomorrow. I'm sure they're watching now. I'll send them this presentation so they can review it. We need to have discussion and review both with them and with you as you go back and study the slides and reflect. And then we will attend AFC on 11:30 because they really wanted to have opportunities to speak with us prior to the final recommendations of the budget. And I think you wanted to hear their reflections as well before you received my final recommendations. And then there's another 2 weeks before you take your final vote. So we've built in time to be reflective. I just have to say, I'm not seeing lots of places to go to offset this number. So I guess at this point, I would open it up to discussion and questions, and we'll dive in.
Thank you, Amber, for the slides presentation and all the explanation behind the numbers. And thank you for putting that in front of us earlier than you normally would, just so that we can digest it and also receive feedback from other groups before we finalize it. So I'd open it up to committee members for questions or comments.
And Irene and Daniel, if you can help me keep track of questions, it'd just be helpful then so we can start to, you know, if you garner those, Irene, we can go back and answer. Not that you have to have questions, but, you know, there's time for you to look at this and digest it and forward your questions. That's the goal of presenting now and then building in time.
It's also very straightforward, like what's pushing on this budget is straightforward to me anyway. Sarah, what do you have?
No, I agree with that too. It was nice to see the different percentages where we would have been without COVID impacts, and you know, with just our regular transportation contract that we had to add in, and with the decision to do the kindergarten. So that was helpful to see, and how that, I think that helps push, not helps, but it pushes the percentage up where it's a bigger jump than maybe it would have been without some of that, the COVID, but the COVID happened. So we have to account for that without the other cuts that we had to make. So my question is, staffing is obviously the biggest part of our budget. And I know we had to add and rearrange staff, and we had some staff that took a leave of absence this year. So how does that fold into this budget? Like, how did you account for, you know, new people we had to add? And would they be there next year? Just trying to wrap my head around that concept of how that affects the money and what's in the budget for that.
So that's a great question. And Irene and I, again, it's very complex to track right now, which is why, you know, we've been combing over the salary the place where we've put the majority of our energy, because it's 82% of the budget, I think is what the percentage is, has been in the salary line item, really combing through that. So none of the positions that we added based upon needing to extend hiring because of COVID to run the parallel programs, none of those faculty are carried forward in our budget. We also cut an administrative position out of the COVID cuts. That is not back in. We did not restore that. And the percentages that we're running of our increases are run against the COVID cut budget, not our original. We didn't go back to that number and roll the increases on it. So everything in terms of the final voted budget, the percentage accepted at town meeting, is the base budget we worked against for all of those increases.
Okay, that makes sense. So our staffing pre-COVID, yet we did make those cuts. So there are cuts included in that, but not necessarily people that we had to add on in September or any of that.
Right. I mean, we will have, removed money that is not restored right now, even within this increase, right? So I think it's important for people to understand that even within this increase, it hasn't restored those cuts. So the only place where there's a restoration is the 50,000 in technology. That's the one place, because we cut that, and so that is a restoration, but it's not at the complete amount. But I think we're trying not to lose more ground. When you look at if you go back to the totals of what we cut like 150,000 from technology. So, again, this provides some base, but I think it's important to understand that the recovery, and I think Christy said the same thing about her preliminary numbers, is that the recovery from what we cut for COVID, she said this at town meeting, will take time to recover from multiple budgets, not just one. You're not recovering any of that other than the 50,000 in technology. You're just rolling forward contracts and, zeroing out the growth. So, it's going to take us time to figure out, what those losses are.
Amber, I understand the fact that we are moving, let's say, attempting to recover from where we would have been from the pre-COVID budget to where we're going. But on the other hand, a $3.5 million increase in the school budget is going to have a significant impact in what the town is going to do going forward. And if we don't see an increase in town revenue for one reason or another, I really don't think we're going to be able to go there. I just don't think the town can sustain that kind of an increase, irrespective of the justification for it, as we go forward in budgeting. And so I think we at least have to search out within the Board of Selectmen and the town manager, what do we see our revenue predictions to be going forward in this next fiscal year? And if it's not there, then we, as we did with COVID, will have to bear some of the impact of less than optimal increase in the budget in order to do the best we can for the taxpayers in the town. And so I guess that's my comment.
Yeah, I think I certainly recognize that. And again, this is a fluid process where we're looking at it and talking about it. But I want to make one point too, and I think it's important to recognize that the annual percentage increase on salaries, again, is much. I think, what is it in this slide? I gotta look. What is it? It's the percentage of the salary increase is 6.35, but that's because you've got $700,000 of the K money in there, which you only add once. So, and this is the point you made when we've looked at budgeting, Steve, over the year against the contracts that we've settled with teachers. which is the rollover has to have a continuity to it. And so that rollover isn't 6.35% each year annually as a growth at the town level, budget over budget, but it's the addition of that base once. And I think, again, I'm not sure, again, just to your point, I don't think that that's an annual rollover of that big a piece of our budget, but it's the increase we anticipated we would see once with the kindergarten. So I just want.
Well, you know, I truly understand it, having been a participant in how we got to where we are.
Right.
But the other side of the coin simply is that some of these things just can't be sustained by the town budget and the taxpayers. And so I think what I'm saying here is that, yes, where we are and what we project right this minute is rational. It comes from a whole bunch of different things, including a cutback by the state in its support of our school budget. But the impact is still the same on the taxpayer. And so from that point of view, we need to look at it, I think, in a slightly different way, particularly with, for good or for bad, the enrollment being lower than what we had anticipated by hundreds of kids, if I recall. But what is the reduction this year from last? Daniel, perhaps you can tell us that.
You're asking for the reduction in students?
Yes, total students.
I don't have the exact number. It's somewhere. It's about 100.
Okay, so it's not insignificant in terms of, you know, the things we've seen in past years. So I guess that's my sensitivity to what I've seen so far. Meanwhile, I looked at your comparative tables and they say, okay, I don't see where we could go. So just be aware that, okay, I feel the pain of the taxpayers, but on the other hand, I don't see a rational place where what we can do or where we can go to mitigate the consequences of what this increase appears to be. So I guess I have an open mind as to what we're going to do about all this, but you know, I'm concerned.
Thank you, Steve.
I could be way off, but I thought we had a couple of positions where the grant money was until December, and we were going to apply for to be extended from January to the end of the year. Am I wrong in that? Are we considering that for a couple of positions where the grant money was there till the end of December of this year, and then it was supposed to be?
No, you remember exactly correctly, but that's FY21, which we're in. So when we look at budget, so we're currently pulling on COVID-based grants that have come from the federal and the state level to manage covering those additional staff this year that are based upon COVID only. And those grants end at the end of December. So none of that money looks to be available next year unless they feel like there's impact for recovery, you know, at the state or at the federal level based upon how school districts and towns, you know, have changes in revenue or losses around budgeting. So those are unknown now.
There's no chance we'll get that.
No, not in, I mean, again, there's so many unknowns. I mean, we budgeted as if none of that is, you know, available. And I think that, you know, again, like I don't usually show you this percentage this early, but I want to crystallize the complexity of the discussion. And certainly you can imagine that Irene and I are still looking at everything, but I also think you're not going to get, you know, again, a percentage is $544,000 is 1%. So, you know, we cut that last year in participation of lowering our percentage. And I also think if we cut our percentage year over year, we're eroding our operational costs. And it's the same conversations if we say we don't go to free cash for operations of the budget, right? And if we lower our percentage year over year by offsets of pulling from community ed or different pieces we can't always count on, then we erode the base of that percentage. And I think it's a piece of the conversation this time, given how much we cut in last year's conversation, right, in front of where we ended up with COVID. So at that same time, where we are right now, we're going to go back through all the numbers again and look at it. But, you know, I have fewer grants to push positions onto. We're holding 5 kindergarten positions until the following FY23, which again mitigates that impact until our enrollment number springs back, right? And you see a growth in Chapter 70 potentially as that offset. So we're doing what we can to look at where we are and bring forward a good budget.
So I just have a question about community ed and the COVID cuts. Are we saying that nothing is going back into the budget of those cuts? And is that what you were saying before, that there's aren't, except for the technology 50,000?
Right. So, and the town is doing the same. Like, you know, they made some restoration at fall town meeting, right? So they added positions that they had held on and did some other things, which I thought was very sound on their part. We had cut and held on fewer positions. So, you know, again, like they really did it around positions that they had wanted to add, they waited. So they've brought a couple of those back when you were there for that. I think that was sound. If you look at our cuts, and I'm just looking at it right now, we're not, like we cut substitutes. I think you level funded that again, Irene. So we cut substitutes by 18,000. We held on hiring one position for a custodian position, which we didn't return. We had one we were going to hire in January. We hired that one, paying COVID costs for the first half and salary as anticipated for January because we needed the extra custodial support during this cleaning time. We cut travel and training. We didn't restore that. Supplies, we cut by 30,000. We didn't restore that. Curriculum, we cut. Technology, we cut by 150. We've been able to pick up some savings at the end of FY20 that we used to cover some of that. So you see in the actual expenditures of end of year that we were able to do some of that work, but the actual base budget for technologies we cut by 150. So it restores some of that. And we cut facilities by 61,000, and then we've cut it further this year. So
some, when you say level funded, you're saying that those are back in, but the other pieces are not. Is that correct?
Level funds means we didn't make any increases against those cuts. We just left the number as is because the FY21 budget had those cuts, and we level serviced from those cuts. So they're still out.
They're still out. Yeah. So I guess the other question I have is about this, and I guess I'm with Raghu, which is, I think about this year because I don't have a good handle on how much of this year costs. And therefore, I don't know that there's excess in our budget from this, you know, the combination of the grants that we did receive until December 31st.
Yeah.
Whether there's, you know, transportation savings, you know, my estimate is maybe 100,000. And where's that? That's the 20% of, you know, the total budget, and only like 23% of that, since we're paying a percentage to transportation, even when services are not rendered. But my question about those issues are, that comes back to the town, meaning at the end, I mean, I'm not sure how that, there are pieces of our current budget of FY21 that will get back to the town to just offset in some way what's going to happen in FY22, because I agree with Steve. I'm not sure I understand where, you know, where you go with this, because it is as you know, there's no place to cut. You cut and those aren't going back in. And we're talking about, you know, sort of the base at this point. And base is our salaries and their contracted services, and there's facilities. And, you know, the only thing I saw that went strangely up was trash removal. And that was a very small number, but very high increases, like percentage increases. But there's not something that's blatantly out in any of this budget that says where you would cut. And yet I agree with Steve that this is a lot to ask our town to take in. It's going to be a lot to take in. So I feel like we're definitely in a very different situation than we've been in the past. And, you know, do I think that when I think about the teachers and what they've been able to do, it's pretty extraordinary what they've been able to do, and they deserved the contract that they received. So I don't disagree with that at all. I feel like this is a budget that I can defend because there's no other place. And, you know, I feel like if anyone made the greatest cuts last year, I felt like it was the school budget. We took some serious hits, and we didn't come back to fall town meeting, you know, a couple weeks ago to sort of compensate for any of that. And so, you know, I guess that's my comment about it. I feel like I am someone who can support this budget. I went through the budget book. I went through piece by piece to sort of see what it looked like. I had to really be looking at FY20 and FY19 to get a better sense, because this year is completely convoluted to actually understand it. So I don't have this comparison for this year. And so I think it's still a responsible budget. And that's all I have to say for now. And thank you for putting, you know, Irene, for putting in the work, especially on that, the slide you went through, because I had questions about that circuit breaker slide last time, and it was really interesting to see that change. And I appreciate the work you put into that. And you know, so that's all I have for now. And thank you.
So this might be a good time to bring this discussion to a close, just for tonight, because it's a lot for us to also, you know, take in and think more about. You and I have our meeting tomorrow with our FinCom representatives to digest this a little bit more, and we can take it from there.
And I appreciate the comments, and I think this is the work we share, you know, as I move towards making a final recommendation. I imagine that, you know, our focus will be, as it is each year, on coming back and mitigating that increase in any way possible. But it's not going to be as big a percentage if we, you know, can I zero out the trash and just hope we'll be okay? Yes. Like, you know, at least I'm showing you right now the concrete, absolute contract rollovers. That's what you're seeing in all those numbers. But we have to pay those out of district tuition numbers. We have no choice. And they could go up 10%. I think they're going to go up more than 4% because they all took hits. And you know what they're going to do? They're just going to raise their budget and send us a letter. And we will have no choice but to pay. So if we were ever at a high risk in tuitions, it's the highest it's ever been, because those facilities are very expensive to run, and they will send us their offsets. So, you know, it's very risky to do anything more than we did there. And so we'll go back in and look at grants and revolvings. Again, you know, I think to our point, we need to take it step by step and look at what's possible. We'll meet with the AFC tomorrow. Again, I'm showing you a hard percentage. I don't usually do that. So you understand the work it's going to take to try to find a way to bring it down, unless you want to start cutting staff. So, you know, you're going to either cut faculty, which would be where you would have to go in order to bring that percentage down. That's not going to happen any other way. So you have to decide between now and then, and I'm going to make my final recommendation about what I think you should do, and I will present it to you, and then you'll have to take it from there. You know, and typically, if there's a way to do something with the salary number, I'll do it for you and say, this is what I feel I can represent. You know, we cut and mitigated 8 para positions last year with some really creative solution work. Like, we're doing all that work year over year. So between now and my final percentage, I just think you can't expect to see that there's as much for me to find in any way. So I just think we'll end it here tonight. And I just, you know, I don't want you to think I feel good about that number, but I also think my responsibility is different. It's to represent to you the district that you want me to run and what I think it's going to take for us to maintain services. And, you know, I think we need to see where the town revenues are as well. And we need to pay attention to what's happening and see what happens. Irene's going to work on getting more information on Chapter 70. We're going to get a hard response on the numbers that they use to calculate it for us. And then we'll take a hard look at our enrollment decrease and what percentage we think would spring back for FY23. So we'll do some of that. And then I'll be back to you, you know, in 2 weeks.
I want to go on record of supporting the budget you have in front of us, because I don't believe that we are in a decrease mode right now. I don't think we are. I think that when we come back from all of this, the more we have in place of what we had level funded is what we need to go forward with the school system that we had in place prior to pandemic. So I really want to go on record as saying I am someone, and I just saw what you did to the circuit breaker list and felt like, yes, I see it as risk. And I don't see how we lower any of that, what you have in place. I feel like when I see a greater need to come back from a pandemic so that all our support services are in place, so that when kids have greater needs as we try to readjust and come back to some normalcy, when our kids need greater emotional support, greater academic support to get us back to some place where we hope to ever get to that place where we didn't even notice an impact. That's going to require the budget that you have in front of us. So I want to make sure I'm on record of saying that before we move on, no matter that you're going in front of the other boards after this. So thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Lots to be done. So thank you for your attention. This has been a long meeting. It's important work, as was Daniel's reporting on the status of where we are. I think people, when they see surveys, we have a strong history of reporting the data such that they see it, and we'll share that out to the district. So I would turn it back to you, Madam Chair, and I believe we have a brief executive session.
We do. Yes, so just as a reminder, the next meeting of the school committee will be in 2 weeks on Wednesday, December 2nd at 6 p.m. And so we need a motion to move into executive session. Lisa has that, I believe.
Yes. I make a motion to vote to meet in executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, teacher's contract, and under Mass General Law, Chapter 22G2, Purpose 7, to review and approve executive session minutes from June 10th, July 22nd, August 31st, and October 7th.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I heard Steve first, so thank you, Steve. We'll do a roll call vote. Sarah?
Dulé, yes.
Rega?
Nandan, yes.
Lisa?
Edinburgh, yes.
Steve?
Durant, yes.
And me, Vincent, yes, 5-0. We are in executive session. Thank you.